And welcome to live broadcast here at CSI. I'm Chris Brown, the Director of Policy and Research, and I'm joined by our Legislative Director, Jake Zambrano.
Thank you.
Great to have you here, and we expect all the hard questions you might have to be directed towards Jake, per usual. So we wanted to have a conversation today and allow you to maybe engage and get some questions answered by the expert here on the 2021 session, right? We are now a week, I think, into the restart of the 2021 legislative session, and there are already sort of a lot of flurry of bills and a lot of other bills and expected bills to come. So we want to try to break this down a little bit, but maybe back up and also talk about some of the new composition of the session, the legislature, the top priorities. But Jake, why don't you introduce yourself and give us a little more of your background?
You bet. Thanks, Chris. I appreciate that. This is actually my 20th session as a lobbyist in Colorado.
Two decades.
Yeah, 2 decades. Two decades.
Did you get a plaque for that
the show? I think you probably get like your name on a side door to a committee that nobody uses. I don't know what happens.
30 years.
Yeah,
you get the
right.
plaque.
That's
All
right. That's
All
right. But as most of us know, I'm sure anybody tuning in today, there was an election in November, and that election, every member of the House of Representatives was up, and half of the Senate, 18 seats in the Senate, were up. The Democrats maintained majority in both chambers. Their majority in the House stayed the same, 41-24, and the majority in the Senate increased by a seat. A suburban seat was flipped down in the Centennial area. Senator Tate decided not to run for re-election, and his seat was won by a Democrat, and that made the Senate 20 Democrats, 15 Republicans. Leroy Garcia from Pueblo remained the president of the Senate, elected by him. And we have a new Speaker of the House, Alec Garnett, who's a Central Denver representative, comes from a political family. His father was the DA in Boulder for a long time, ran for Attorney General. And Alec is an excellent speaker and has been hit the ground running. As you know, the situation with the pandemic makes everything in our lives a little different, and the legislature is not an exception. Figuring out how you access your elected officials, how you engage, how you testify is all different now. The Capitol is still open, which is good news. There's definitely just not areas to congregate. It's a lot harder to navigate. And a lot fewer people are let into committee rooms. So there is a standing suggestion made by the legislature that they would like people to testify remotely, and the legislature has provided that option. And on the homepage of the Colorado legislature are instructions on how to do that. And it's not quite as fun. You don't get the full flavor of the experience. But I would definitely encourage folks, if there are issues and bills that you're interested in, just because of COVID, do not engage. Definitely use the protocols that are in place now to be a part of that engagement to the extent that you would like to be.
I mean, I think that's part of just a critical discussion point here. I mean, we do a lot of detail, research and spend way too much time thinking about these issues and mulling them over. But I think that engagement, that public engagement aspect to our legislative process is absolutely critical. So, to just kind of reiterate, you're saying building is open to the public. It's a public space, and it's a state capitol. Committee rooms and committee meetings still accessible, but ultimately for that public engagement, whether it's providing testimony, listening in,
right.
There's always been a video option, audio option, right. But I guess it's more encouraged this time. And you're saying testimony specifically on legislation will be sort of recommended to be done remotely. And Zoom, I guess, will be that's going to be interesting. I don't know how that's going to work, because usually we sit
Right.
in a lobby for 16 hours,
Right.
right? And just
Right.
kind of wait to funnel through the line. Are we gonna get notified on Zoom? We have to sit through the Zoom? How's that going?
Yeah, it's funky, and that there obviously are bugs and kinks that are yet to be worked out. But essentially, it is similar to as if we were sitting in the lobby waiting for our turn. There is kind of a traffic cop that pulls you up onto and makes your feed live and interactive when your 2 minutes or 3 minutes are available. And you say you recite your testimony, and then you have the opportunity for questions from the members. Because the committee rooms are socially distanced, where we used to fit 80 to 100 people in the old
Right.
Supreme Court chambers,
Right.
or the old state library, it's essentially a quarter of that now, and so it affects the experience. Because our legislature is a citizens legislature, and none of the legislators are technically full-time legislators.
Right.
They don't have full-time staffs. The public process and the experts that are in the building from a lobbying perspective really do add to the conversation. They help bills in real time get better.
Certainly.
And so that's going to be a struggle, because those resources won't be as readily available as they have been in years past. But we'll get through it.
Yeah.
The COVID response is obviously a big priority in the building. And so looking at everything that's been introduced through the lens of what's best for Coloradans who are trying to navigate their way through this pandemic, I think should be a priority. And at least in the opening week's speeches, that was definitely referenced. But the proof is in the pudding. We got a long way to go.
Yeah, yeah. So, and the website for the legislative session is pretty accessible. Again, always encourage joining, viewing when they're in chamber, taking votes. It's always an interesting experience, and just a tremendous civic reminder just to kind of see the pulse of policy being enacted and debated. And if you're not going down to the Capitol, you can still access that. And still, I remember a couple years ago riding home in a taxi. I don't remember why I took a taxi. I don't remember. It wasn't driving. I don't remember what happened, but took maybe an Uber, and being picked up from the Capitol, going back home, and filling them in on why were the Capitol? Why are people there so late? What's going on? And we tuned in on the conversation that was still going on.
Yep.
And I think for this Uber driver that I think was, sort of very new to the process, it was such an interesting experience to just sort of see real time the conversation at the Capitol that someone in his car had just kind of been involved in, not
Yep.
a real, stakeholder there, but and to see it and sort of feel more engaged with his state. And it was an interesting experience, and I think this is the time, and so maybe that's the nice view of it. Maybe after 20 years, you have a different view of the whole experience. But
no, it's it's a fascinating experience, and it can be intimidating for just an Uber driver who's never been in the building.
Yeah.
But in Colorado, we're pretty fortunate because the framers of the Colorado Constitution intended that we meet in the wintertime because when Colorado became a state, we were largely agricultural. And when farmers that wanted to serve, farmers and ranchers, the only time they could serve was in the wintertime when they weren't harvesting or planting crops or tending the crops. And so, the structure of our legislature is one that we meet for 120 days in the dead of winter. And then by the springtime, by the time it's time to plant, the farmers go home and they plant their crops. Obviously, times have changed, but that framework has always been partial to a citizens legislature, and by design, that means that our legislators are extremely accessible. They have full-time jobs in other walks of life. They live in the communities from which they're elected, and it makes for a better relationship and rapport with the constituent when it's not somebody that flies off to Washington and then comes home at Christmas and Easter. These folks are they live and work in their communities. So, and I would argue that everybody is there with genuine intentions and believes that their philosophy and their priorities are important and what's best for Colorado. we don't always
Right.
all agree
Right.
on the end result, but nobody is there with ill intentions, and that's what makes it a pleasant place to work. Is that there are good policy minds that just see the world a little differently.
Yeah. Well, so on those priorities, we've studied the labor force and the Colorado economy quite extensively. It's no news breaking here that Colorado businesses and the economy remain really in a tough spot. We've seen, I think I just saw, still 25% of jobs that were in the entertainment and retail and food and accommodation sectors are not back from where we started last year. Over 25% of jobs. It's a staggering number, and the economy is still, has relatively high unemployment rates. December was a pretty devastating month for businesses that we're still digging out of, and there's promising news in the near future with the vaccine and the rollout, and the expectation that things will begin to open up a little bit more through the summer. Still uncertainty of how the fall but we know that there'll be lingering effects from the unemployment insurance trust fund that has been fully depleted and is taking in federal loans that businesses will have to be replenished over the coming years. So there's immediate concerns, long-term concerns around how the economy will recover and businesses are going to be able to rebound. And I think we all want a quick recovery. So maybe with that preface, but with your lens as well, what are the general priorities, the attitude, and 600 bills? So it's hard to really organize and put a single theme around that many pieces of policy. But what is your sense of the general objectives of this session, and what can people maybe expect?
Yeah, great question, Chris, and it's a question we get a lot for those of us that are in and out of the building every day. There are 100 legislators, 65 in the House and 35 in the Senate, and each one is allowed to introduce 5 bills. Whatever that idea is, whatever the topic, whatever is their priority. So when some people ask me a question like that, there are 100 legislators that have 5 priorities, so that there's 500 different priorities for the session. But I think what's top of mind and top of list for all the members is how our state comes out of this pandemic, what that recovery curve looks like, where opportunities might be to accelerate that recovery. And we're kind of fortunate in Colorado in that we are a state that people like to live in and work in and play in and vacation in. And so there are some sectors that will rebound much sooner than others in other states. But I think our legislature is going to, focus on that recovery. There's a lot of different ideas of what that recovery should look like and could look like. There's some outstanding questions on what the additional federal response is, and I think that will play a lot into where the legislature focuses their priorities. About 85% of our state budget is on autopilot. It is required, mandated. Medicaid really sucks up a lot of where our budget can go, and so the federal dollars kind of change and shift what you can do with that other 15% based on that backfill. I do think we'll have a major healthcare conversation in Colorado. I think one was planned for the last session, and then when the pandemic hit, everything was kind of put on hold.
Certainly.
You're seeing a lot of legislation around pharmaceuticals and transparency and importation from other countries, hospitals and how they their billing structures and their rates, and additional oversight from the legislature and vis-a-vis the state on those topics. And so transportation is going to be another hot issue. How we fund our infrastructure. There's been a couple of questions on the ballot in the last few years, and all have failed. It's clearly a need. There's not total consensus on how that need gets addressed, and I think this legislature is going to take another whack at addressing that need. But I think the jury's still out there on what that solution looks like. And then education, it's a pivotal to quality of life. teacher pay and in-school learning, Zoom, and all of these
Testing.
new, testing,
Yeah.
these terms that never were in the soup together are now in the soup together, and that recipe has changed. And what that looks like on the other end is we're still a long way off from knowing what that's going to look like.
And so when, not to look too far ahead, when is the session in? When I know that we're in the early stages, and I was just thinking as, you compile these different issues and ideas and how long they have for debate.
Yeah.
Have they changed the timing on when this session will end? I know they maybe have some ability to do that, but when will this session end?
So the Supreme Court has allowed the legislature under the emergency rules to still maintain their not requirement, but their ability to meet for 120 days a year. Because of where we were on the COVID dial in January and December, this legislature and its leadership decided to push back the convening of the body for about 30 days roughly.
Right.
So typically we get out the second Wednesday in May. It'll probably be sometime late May, early June this time. So one of the unknown facts about the Capitol is there's no central heating and air. So being in that building in the middle of June could force some people to make up their minds fairly quickly, because it's
by design.
It's by design. That's right.
Don't improve.
That's right.
The
No
AC.
air conditioning. No air conditioning in the Capitol. So.
All right. Well, there was one bill that that jumped out in particular.
Yeah.
It's not just because it's lunchtime and where my head's at, but along with the long-standing debates on healthcare and transportation, it seems like COVID has also exposed some market and regulatory type changes that might be needed. One that jumped out is restrictions on third-party food delivery services. I mean, fun title, but this is really, all of the food delivery services that we've come to use and demand in probably record levels, obviously, in the last 12 months because of the need to distance and no in-person dining. So tell us a little bit about what some of the changes on that front are being debated at the state level. And this might impact consumers in a real way with availability and the growth of this sector, but tell me what they're thinking on the food delivery service changes.
You bet. It's a great question, and a bill and a policy debate that probably a lot of people don't know exists. And to your point, the pandemic really exposed a weakness. Technology in the free market has created an entirely new industry around food delivery. I'm old enough to remember that when I ordered a pizza, I called the pizza shop, and the pizza shop delivered my pizza. And now there are multiple options and opportunities for that pizza, who delivers that pizza to me. And what has kind of bubbled up during the pandemic is that relationship between the restaurant and the third-party delivery service and me as the customer, what that relationship should look like and what it can look like. And I think there's a lot of layers of confusion in that relationship from the restaurant's perspective, the third party's perspective, and then me as the customer. And as we all want to save our local pub and our local restaurants, and I think that there was a real struggle at the height of the pandemic, and the governor addressed this kind of midway through in an executive order that the price for that food delivery should be negotiated and set and not fluctuate or unknown. It shouldn't come out of the restaurant's cut. Restaurant margins aren't that great to begin with. Those folks are struggling and operating on a real slim margin, and to boot, you can only have 25 or 50% of your chairs available. Takeout becomes the real bread and butter of whether or not you can make it. Certainly. And so I think this bill addresses some of those issues, and Senator Rodriguez and Representative Byrd are really taking a shot at helping right-size the regulatory environment for the restaurant owners, but also create some stabilization and some regulatory knowns for the third parties.
Right. One thing I didn't know that's sort of interesting is that it seems like through the pandemic, maybe leading up to it as well, the delivery services in an attempt to really grab market share, this massive competition for this new sector, they were listing and are listing restaurants that they don't have an explicit agreement with. So they are listing a restaurant or an entity that they're willing to deliver food from, that they don't have that agreement. And so restaurants through this have sort of been notified by customers or seen people come into their lobby that are this third party, and that causes a lot of issues. And I'm not a lawyer, right? So let's take a disclaimer, right?
Yes.
There's a disclaimer.
Makes
This is
two
two
of us.
guys
Yeah.
ranting about the potential ramifications
That's right.
of policy. It's a fun one.
Yep.
And I think people should ponder this, but I didn't know that those agreements may not actually be in place. So one of the elements of this would actually require an agreement between the third party and the entity,
Yeah.
the restaurant,
Yeah.
which I think makes a lot of sense.
Right. Right.
In some ways to have that explicit agreement. And so if one thing I know that California passed similar legislation, but they saw a rapid sort of drop off in the number of restaurants listed because there were no agreements.
Yeah.
So that might be one thing people
Right.
see.
Right.
Why is my restaurant not listed anymore?
Right.
Well, it might be because they didn't have an agreement. Now they got to go back and negotiate an agreement
Right.
between those two parties. So they could come back. I don't know how that process will
Yeah.
work out in the long run, but that seems to make sense to me.
Right.
For certainly for the restaurants, and I
Right.
don't know if I can go and advertise another
Yeah.
type of businesses and
Right.
sell it as a third party without that kind of agreement. So that
Right.
makes sense to me. And I know that there are also some emergency orders
Yeah.
being debated in other municipalities around capping rates and capping how much the charges can be, which I have a little more questions on, but there's a lot circling on this. I know Aurora
Mhm.
has proposed some emergency legislation. Has Denver moved on anything?
Denver
or
has
discussed?
moved, Aurora has moved.
Okay.
And this is this is what's great about the free market, right? There was
Yeah.
a demand, the market responded.
Certainly.
There were services out there that were willing to deliver. Obviously, the delivery driver is taking a heightened risk to bring something to your house or my house that sounded good that night for dinner.
Right.
So not so as to completely throw delivery services under the bus, but
Right.
the free market sometimes gets in front of the regulatory environment. And I think what Senator Rodriguez and Representative Byrd are trying to do here is kind of right size that, creating some long-term parameters to what the
Yeah.
relationship between a delivery service and a restaurant has to look like, and between a driver and a delivery service.
Yeah.
And I think that's for the most part healthy, because at some point we will come out of this pandemic,
Yeah.
knock on wood, and that you will have to frame out how these delivery services interact with the point of sale a little bit more clearly. And so this bill is a reflection of that effort.
Certainly.
The second part of the bill talks a little bit about how delivery service drivers are compensated, and this goes to your point a little earlier about what have been referred to largely as gig workers.
Right.
A delivery service or an Uber driver for you or I is considered a gig worker. Their work fluctuates based on demand, and we see that in kitchens and restaurants and theaters and concert venues, and these folks are no different. And so this bill also is trying to create some stability for the gig worker that decides to be a delivery
Certainly.
driver for food, and I think that too is important, because without them, this transaction never takes place. And I think that part of the response out of the pandemic is we start to codify how some of these gig workers, as they decide where they're going to, where they're going to focus their time and earn their living, that there is an outlined process for them to do that in this market, should they choose to be in this market.
Yeah. No, I always say, in these kind of debates, it's really about getting the rules of the game right. To promote that transparency, free competition.
Right.
You were a football player, and
Right.
and there's a reason football wouldn't be football without 4 downs.
That's right.
But if the NFL got a team and to compete against the other teams, there's some ways in which it can impinge on that free competition. But you still need rules, and you still need parameters to protect private property and protect individuals. So it's really a question of how far do you go? So this is an interesting one to track.
That's great.
We just
Yep.
spent, what, 15 minutes on one bill?
That's right.
So we have 600 to go. You ready?
Let's do it.
Let's go. You guys ready? No, I don't know. I don't have anything else. If there's anything else you want to discuss, let me know. But I'd encourage anyone listening, please join for the Eggs in the Economy, which is an event we put on at the end of every quarter. So at the end of March, you can go to our website, commonsense-institute.co.org, find more information about that event and our lineup of speakers. But any last parting words or?
Chris, I really appreciate
20
the
years of
opportunity.
wisdom.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, this has been fun. Would look forward to doing it again. And folks out there, use our website, use our research as a resource. We make ourselves available to everyone
Yeah.
should they have questions. So we'd love to be engaged, love to have these conversations. So we'd love to hear back from our viewers. Thank you.
Thank you.